Welcome. Thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Camilla Dreyer and I'm the Managing Director of Corporate Sustainability and Citizenship for Accenture here in the UK and Ireland. I couldn't be any more delighted to be here today to reflect on the most important nature and biodiversity conference in a decade, namely the UN Biodiversity Conference, COP15, organised by the Convention on Biological Diversity, which took place in December in Montreal. I'm so pleased to be joined today by my co-host, the one and only Eva Sabi, Executive Director of Business for Nature, to share some insights from the negotiations alongside our wonderful panel, where we can really dig into some of the key outcomes of COP15 and hopefully have a bit of a discussion around what all this means for businesses and financial institutions. Business for Nature, as I'm sure many of you know, is the leading global coalition of business and conservation organizations working to demonstrate leadership on nature and calling for much more policy ambition to restore the planet's vital natural systems, the systems upon which we as humans and communities and therefore business all depend. The World Economic Forum's most recent global risk report shows that over the next 10 years, environmental risks make up 6 of the top 10 risks globally, and biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse is right up there, ranking in the top 5, alongside natural disasters and failure to mitigate climate change. So really, the conversation couldn't be any more important and pertinent right now. And we all know that we need much more action from business, and urgently so, on the topic of nature. At Accenture, we've been working alongside the UK government and a number of large businesses on what we're calling the Get Nature Positive Toolkit, which is really all about showcasing some of the innovative ways in which businesses are already taking action in various different sectors on nature and biodiversity loss, and really seeking to build momentum behind business as an ally of nature. And the work that Eva and her organization are doing now seeks to really scale this kind of momentum globally. It's clear that we need to act quickly and that we don't have much time to reverse and halt the devastating impacts on nature of biodiversity loss. And it's this continued destruction of nature that really puts at risk all of our livelihoods, our economy, and of course, the prosperity of business globally. So really, that's what COP15 was all about from a business perspective, to make sure that we delivered an agreement that would have a truly transformational impact to help really reset our business impact on nature and put nature on a path to recovery, to have a much more kind of symbiotic relationship with nature. So the time is really now. And the conversation today is about how do we get businesses to step up in 2023. So that's the question we'll be exploring with a fabulous panel today. But just before we get stuck in, I want to hand over to Eva to just open the discussion and to just get your perspective. You were on the ground at COP15 with your whole Business for Nature team. And I'm really keen to hear from you now that you've had a bit of a chance to digest and reflect. What was your final take on the agreement? Did COP15 deliver?
Thanks so much, Camilla. It's really a pleasure to be hosting this webinar with you. And the answer is yes, COP15 absolutely delivered. And I'll tell you a little bit more why. Maybe for those who might not be as familiar, I'll start with some quick context about this COP15 that we're talking about. So in December in Montreal, governments from around the world met at COP15 to negotiate and, importantly, agree a new global biodiversity framework. And that framework includes 4 goals and 23 different targets that now governments will need to implement. You can think of this framework as being the equivalent to the Paris Agreement, which provided a roadmap for climate action. Well, the Global Biodiversity Framework, or GBF, as it's known, provides a framework for nature action. As you were saying, I mean, the business case for tackling nature loss has never been so clear and urgent. Whether you're an agri-business that relies on healthy soils and pollination, whether you're manufacturing plants, all of them use fresh water each and every day. The risk, therefore, of ecosystem degradation, of species and nature loss, really presents, I should say, very real and material risks for companies, as you were highlighting through the new World Economic Forum Global Risks Report. But the flip side of risks is, of course, the opportunities, and companies are now recognizing what those opportunities could be to transform and adapt more quickly, to be more resilient. And that's a key word, resilient, in the face of growing natural resources pressures and shocks, which are, of course, exacerbated by the consequences of climate change. So focusing now that the role of business and finance is absolutely critical, and it comes with this responsibility to not only act, as you were saying, Camilla, but also advocate for ambitious policy. And that was really the case with the Global Biodiversity Framework, where we had so many leading and progressive companies on the line here as well represented, that together with partner organizations were calling for an ambitious framework. And that really had a tremendous impact on the ground. You could argue that now we have the framework, the GBF, the real work begins, and businesses must and they must work with governments across their sectors to help deliver and implement the commitments that were made in December. So now we're all about the implementation. Now, the CBD, the Convention on Biological Diversity, repeated over and over the message that the GBF has to be a framework for all of society, and that includes business, in terms of being actors to contribute to the success of the framework itself. I'll highlight in a minute, some of the specific targets, but the message is that business has to help contribute to achieving all of the targets in the framework. And that's because overall, the resilience of our entire economy depends on nature. We know that there is no economy, no livelihoods, as you were saying, Camilla, without us protecting, restoring, and sustainably using natural resources. So the big takeaway from COP15, very excitedly, is that we saw unprecedented support from business and finance. There were over 1,000 representatives who showed up in Montreal, and that itself was a signal to negotiators and really helped achieve the successful outcome. I'll go into some of the detailed asks and the targets that are most relevant in our view, but I'll just quickly mention that in Montreal, governments agreed some really exciting pieces and the nuggets that were picked up by the media in particular. Governments agreed to protect 30% of the world's land and sea and to restore 30% of degraded ecosystems by 2030. They also agreed the need to protect and acknowledge the rights of Indigenous people, who are ultimately the biggest stewards of nature and biodiversity. And that was a really welcome development across the board. So we went into COP15 with this strong unified business voice. We honed in on 3 key asks, which we felt together would be pivotal in triggering transformational change that's necessary. What's really incredible, and we can all be really proud of, is that these 3 asks were reflected and agreed in Montreal. So the first was to encourage governments to adopt a clear and urgent 2030 mission to halt and reverse biodiversity loss, which is what we mean by nature positive. It's the nature positive societal goal that means we need to have more nature in 2030 than 2020. This is now agreed, the core mission of the GBF, that all parts of society must rally behind. You can think of it as the sort of 1.5 degrees global warming limit equivalent for the climate emergency. The second thing we went in with strongly was to raise the ambition on environmentally harmful subsidies. And that now in Target 18 is very strong in the framework by reforming all environmentally harmful subsidies, by redirecting or eliminating them. It was agreed, it includes a numeric target to reduce harmful subsidies by $500 billion a year And that will help reset the rules of our economic and financial systems, because instead of unintentionally flowing money into nature negative outcomes, we need to redirect that to reward nature positive ones. And then finally, and then perhaps most significant for business and finance here, was the inclusion of mandatory requirements for all large businesses and financial institutions to both assess and disclose their risks, impacts, and dependencies on biodiversity. And that's Target 15. So Target 15, if we dig in a little bit, is it also says that large companies will need to look at not only their direct operations, but their supply chains, value chains, and portfolios. This is really very much in line, if you think about it, with how many companies will assess and disclose their climate impacts with scope 1, 2, and 3 GHG emissions. You may ask about, what about the smaller companies? Well, in Target 15, the small and medium-sized enterprises will be encouraged and enabled to assess and disclose. So the requirements specifically fall on the large companies, who will then need to think about how they support the smaller companies as part of their own strategies. And maybe the final point to mention here is that the target covers risks, impacts, and dependencies on biodiversity quite broadly, and it's not only restricted to those risks that would be considered financially material. So all in all, the language is really strong. And if you're a business, you should be expecting nature-related assessment and disclosure to become standard practice, as is already beginning to be the case for climate disclosure. In terms of next steps, if you're interested in the policy discussions, well, what happens now is that each government needs to update what's called the National Biodiversity Strategies and Action Plans, NBSAPs, as they're called, kind of the equivalent of the NDCs on climate. So they need to update these national action plans in alignment with the targets of this new global biodiversity framework. And this is where governments can build on guidance like the Natural Capital Protocol, the Task Force on Nature-related Financial Disclosure, which will be ready later this year. The beta version's already out, and the Science-Based Targets for Nature Network and their methodologies. And they'll be coming out in the next couple months with updated guidance on setting science-based targets for freshwater and land, just so you know. And I know it can feel like we've got a bit of a methodology soup going on here, but please feel reassured that all of these organizations are working closely together. Their frameworks align very much, and we are driving for more alignment and consistency. So if you're a company listening here, you can also call and expect more convergence, in particular now that the ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board, has indicated that it will focus on biodiversity and nature too. And just also to reassure you, I guess, many of you will already be assessing and disclosing on your GHG emissions. Probably many of you are already looking at freshwater consumption, pollution, also maybe deforestation. So you can build on this to go further into your impacts and dependencies, but you likely won't be starting from zero. So this is really a build to understand risks and opportunities much better. So I'll end by saying that, we basically, as humanity right now, are faced with interconnected challenges. And that means that we will require collaborative solutions, will require innovation, finance, technology. And no one of us is being asked or can indeed solve this alone, but every one of us is being asked now to contribute. So either we will all reach the goals of the Global Biodiversity Framework, all the goals and targets, either we'll all reach a nature positive world by 2030, or none of us will. And so now it is basically the ultimate joint effort for nature and humanity. Thanks, Camilla.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you for such a clear and compelling view of the global biodiversity framework, and the fact that it really represents a stake in the ground for business, with plenty of targets and goals for us all to digest as we move on to really focus on implementation. But I think as you majored on towards the end of your remarks, perhaps the thing that really caught the eye of the business community in general was this agreement by governments to require large businesses to assess and disclose their risks, dependencies and impacts on biodiversity by 2030. So perhaps that's something we might dig into in a bit more detail as we seek to understand better from our fantastic panel what COP15 really means for business in 2023 and beyond. So as I said, I have a fantastic panel of experts joining us today, including some real trailblazers who are already with their businesses setting some clear targets and goals within their businesses around protecting, restoring and sustainably using nature. So I'm delighted to have their perspectives here today to help add a bit more color to Eva's analysis of the outcomes of COP15 through a business lens. So let me introduce our panel to you. We've got Christina Nirmala-Ström, who is Head of Sustainability at IKEA Supply. Christina is responsible for driving IKEA's global supply chain sustainability agenda and focusing on climate responsible sourcing, biodiversity, human rights and social impact. Welcome, Christina. We've got Tim Christopherson, who joined Salesforce last year after gaining a wealth of experience in the International Union for Conservation of Nature and the UN Environment Programme. In his current role as a VP of Climate Action at Salesforce, Tim empowers the Salesforce team and customers to take meaningful action for nature, climate and people. And finally, we've got Xing Liu, who is the community lead for Champions for Nature at the World Economic Forum. And in this role, Xing gathers leaders from business, government and civil society to advocate for a net zero, nature positive global economy and ensuring that nature is at the heart of discussions and commitments. So welcome all and thank you for being here today. I might come to you first, Christina, and start with you. I know you two were on the ground in Montreal with many other business leaders. How do you see momentum around nature evolving in the business community in general? And in particular, what does this look like at IKEA?
Well, I think that we were 1,000 businesses, as Eva said, on the ground there, and many more following also, what we did in our social media and, of course, in news reporting and so on. So I would say we were there. We were some there, but I think we had very many more with us. So there's a momentum, of course, that all stakeholders now need to lean in and start to do the work, because it's work. This is not something that will stop by having nice words. What we are doing then in IKEA now, we are working with the SBT methodology. We've also been part of piloting part of the content there to also evolve it further. So now we go from the more general assessment to actually see our own real impact and dependency. And of course, when we know that, we can also better steer our actions to actually improve, to see where we're already doing good, where we can do more, and where we actually need to do better, and maybe even stop some things. I mean, we are a company and a brand with our products, where, of course, I'm mostly working then in our supply chain, all the raw materials, almost that you can think about. And we need to secure that all of that is done in a good way for nature. And we cannot do that alone. So we're working with NGOs, with the third-party certification schemes, and trying to influence them to, set good ambitions and to get also the movement across the business. Because as you said, Eva, it is for us now we're a big company, so we need to do something and be in the driving seat and also hopefully attract the small and medium enterprises as well. But we need to succeed together. And I think we are with the intention that we want and we need to do something here. And of course, with the Target 15, it will also help to catalyze new development in digital solutions, in transparency, in traceability, possibilities for it. It's so important. I want to specifically say that if we don't have traceability and know how to know where our different effects happens, we cannot do anything about it. So that is very, very important for us to know more. And also I think from us to move more from commodity-based view to a full landscape based. So what does it mean when we go in as IKEA, for instance, for wood purchase, wood sourcing or cotton for the full society, and how can we work? And there we work with our partners such as WWF to do even better parts on the ground. And I want to say the last thing is that, yes, now we were on the COP for biodiversity, but I think for us as a corporation, it's so important that we work with climate, nature and people, the inequalities and the livelihoods at the same time, because they're all interconnected. And I think that we kind of do that somehow, but our story has to be much more kept together. So I think the narratives that we can do, because we can also attract people to do the work, because you might think it's very complex, but actually if you target one, you can actually work with all three of them. So I think that's the way to also not scare businesses to how do you start to do it? Well, start somewhere, look and have a little bit broader perspectives, and actually we'll find that you have solutions for more than what you maybe thought. But it requires work. So let's start.
Thank you. And I think we heard that again and again. Yeah, continue.
Yeah.
We heard that again and again in COP. I think let's not let perfect be the enemy of the good. We don't have time, so we just sort of need to get on with it. Christina, I heard you talk a lot about, what Eva also touched on, this kind of sense that we have to achieve this through collaboration. We have to take a holistic approach. How are you thinking about your customers in IKEA, and how are you helping them to be part of the solution around halting and reversing nature loss?
I mean, we are a big brand with a big reach, and with big reach comes big responsibility. So we believe that we can inspire, educate, and also share with our customers, what are the choices they can make in their purchase and in the way of living. So it's also actually about behavior, nudging, and so on. And since we work with many people, the most important thing IKEA can do, if we have to make also sustainable living and solutions affordable, desirable, and available for the many. This is not a luxury for the few, because then we will not get to the movement. So that we believe is very important, and it's part of our DNA to work like that, since we have the full value chain in our command, if I say like that, from what we want to develop, what materials we use, how the customer is going to use it, how can we prolong the cycles, of course, with the circularity in mind, and also then tell the customers what does it mean for them, how can they take care, prolong the life length of their products, because of course we also need to secure that we take less out from nature. We need to reduce. We talk about 30% goals here, 30-30. So that means something. So we have a lot of material out there in the world, in IKEA products or in others. That is our future raw materials, I would say like that. And then we have our circular design principles, so we can also do that a bit. And then we come to traceability and transparency, to actually also let the customers know, where does our goods come from? And where do we source? So for instance, last week, we just now launched our forestry map, where we actually share openly. That's our biggest raw material. About 60% of IKEA's products is out of wooden-based products, material. So we're sharing, where do we source, what kind of products and wood, so that people can also know. So we believe that's the way to do our part, to help to show this is how transparent solutions can look like. And we intend to increase that then to more and more material. So that's what we hope also then customers can sit with a little bit more wealth of information, and they can also do, and that they can trust that the products we put out there, we have already been thinking, about climate, nature, and people, so that they should feel okay when they come to IKEA.
And Tim, if I could just come to you as a leader from quite a different different business, who probably thinks about raw materials in quite a different way to a company like IKEA. What are your reflections on the main implications for a company like Salesforce coming out of COP15?
Thanks, Camilla. So Salesforce is one of the largest software companies in the world. We are the world leader on customer relationship management. And for us, nature is material to our business, but more importantly, it is material to way over half of all our customers. And of the tens of thousands of customers we have, they're now all starting to pay attention, partly because of Target 15 on reporting requirements to nature. So this is also a large data management challenge that we want to help to solve. For my background, I have to admit, I was also at the 2010 Global Summit, the Aichi targets, that time working for the UN and for the Convention on Biodiversity. And from Montreal, I think there were three things that were different for this global biodiversity framework. First of all, there's more attention to the target that was agreed. Business is only one component. There's also a lot more attention in the general public to nature loss and the need to do something about it. Secondly, there's a shift in how businesses view nature and climate action, which for us are inextricably linked, from just risk to opportunity. If you read the WEF 2023 Global Risk Report, the long-term risks, 6 out of 10 are all about nature and climate. But then you look at the short-term risk, what worries people in the one-year horizon, and the cost of living crisis tops the list. So we are at this moment now where we have to keep the long-term perspective and the holistic perspective. And what helps with that is the third thing that's different now is money. When I worked for UNEP, we started something called the State of Finance for Nature report, and that is tracking how much money is invested in nature, comes out every year. And there's a significant increase, not only in public money, but in private money, in investment funds. Just during Montreal, we saw the launch of several new 100 million strong investment funds in nature. So this is a very positive sign. But of course, we have now, as Eva said, as businesses continue to push and implement, Salesforce has nature policy priorities that will help us do that. Because while the Global Biodiversity Framework is addressing some of the policy failures in this space, that then in turn can address some of the market failures, the main one being that nature is invisible to the economy, there's still a lot of gaps. So we have to all work together and push for phasing out harmful subsidies, for doing whatever we can to make sure that there is a business for tomorrow, because 100% of GDP worldwide depends on nature.
Thank you. And just coming back to some of these many gaps we have to fill and the urgency with which we have to fill them. I think we often hear a lot, and again, I think we heard at COP, quite a lot of promise from technology and innovation. So from a business like Salesforce, how do you think about the role of technology in really supporting businesses in accelerating their action on nature?
Amongst the Salesforce customers, there are also about 50,000 NGOs. So basically, everybody who works in the nature space is also one of our customers. But I think what is more important for solving the implementation challenge now of the Global Biodiversity Framework is to support a culture of ecopreneurs. So people and businesses who make it their main mission and their purpose to address climate change, to address nature loss, to address inequality. And these ecopreneurs are starting to pop up everywhere. Just a few years ago, when we started our focus on helping ecopreneurs, we had to basically unearth them. And now it's more like they're popping up like mushrooms after an autumn rain. And there is so much happening now in the nature technology space that is really encouraging, but also really needed, because there are 50,000 companies that will be impacted by the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. We're exactly 11 months away from implementation of that directive in the EU. So that is really spurring a race to find out, what is my nature footprint as a company? How can I address it? What does it mean to contribute to a nature positive target? One thing where we're investing as Salesforce is through the Trillion Trees initiative with the World Economic Forum and now over 80 other companies, to have an easy entry point to become involved in the nature and climate space. We also support Uplink, which is the World Economic Forum, Deloitte, and Salesforce platform for sourcing ecopreneurs. And Uplink runs specific challenges, be it on ocean biodiversity or on sustainable forest management. Manulife is a big Canadian finance player. They just started a big Uplink challenge on sustainable forest management, sourcing the winning tech solutions in that space that then can be scaled. So with Uplink, with 1G.org, and hopefully also with the voluntary carbon market and our net zero marketplace, we will help to channel funding into this space, but also have that funding implemented with the right technology startups, with the right ecopreneurs. If for the voluntary carbon market, and now biodiversity credits are actually added to that overall mix because they're explicitly mentioned in Target 19, if only 10% of the world's largest 1,700 companies, if all of the world's 1,700 largest companies would invest only 10% of their residual emissions that they cannot offset right now into voluntary credits, that would generate $1 trillion by 2030. So we need that money now in the absence of a global price on carbon and comprehensive compliance markets. We need to channel that kind of investments into nature and into climate action right now. So we also see nature and reversing nature loss as very much linked to climate action. And all of that has to have local community benefits for people, as Christine also said.
Thank you so much, Tim. Xing, I would love to bring you in now. We're particularly delighted to have you with us today, given that you've just returned from the World Economic Forum in Davos. And I think we've heard, actually, Tim, I think you said 100% of world GDP is dependent on nature and ecosystem services. I think Wes has previously estimated it at a more conservative, nearly 50%, but certainly has nature loss and biodiversity up there as a top global risk. Yet, despite all of that, our own Accenture's own recent UNGC and CEO study on sustainability shows that only 18% of CEOs are actively prioritizing, protecting, and restoring biodiversity. So from your perspective, from what you heard on the ground in Davos, do you think nature and biodiversity is likely to become more of a material or relevant issue for CEOs?
Thank you, Camilla, and thank you very much for having me here. Actually, just to clarify, both of you are saying the correct thing. 100% of the world GDP are dependent on nature and the ecosystem service, and 50% of the GDP is highly or moderately dependent on nature. And yes, exactly. 2 weeks ago, we had the Davos, the 2023 annual meeting. And definitely, we have seen more interests and awareness on nature topic, on biodiversity from companies. Actually, I don't know if you have followed the live streamed plenary session leading the charge through the Earth New Normal, which is actually featured the Professor Johan Rockström and Joyita Gupta. They shared their new findings on the safe and just Earth system boundaries. This live stream session has received over 130,000 views, which is incredible. And this shows how much interest we have generated. Also, another statistic this year is 1/5 of all the official sessions at Davos are nature or climate themed, and almost 50% of the affiliated sessions that are submitted by our partner organizations, 50% are related to nature and climate. So again, we have seen these interests. I think biodiversity in the past 10 to 15 months has really caught up to the climate debate and almost used much shorter time than the climate debates has used. But to be honest, I think from the observation and what we heard at Davos, we still have a lot of work to do. The battle is not won yet. For example, at the panel where the Tech Resource CEO, Jonathan Price, he was saying during an investment discussion with the investors, they still have to educate the investors on their commitments on nature. Right. So I think nature is still not there yet in boardrooms at CEO level. I agree with Eva that now we have the global biodiversity framework and we need to focus on implementation. But also, how do we not lose the momentum and sustain the discussion at the CEO level, but also focusing on national level, and implementation is very crucial at this stage.
Yes, and on that theme of implementation, what might you point to actions that businesses could take right now, or that some businesses are already taking to really better understand their risks and impacts and dependencies on nature?
Yeah, it's a very good question. We actually, along with Business for Nature, WBCSD, SBT, and TNFD, actually 8 organizations, we came together and developed this high-level action for business on nature. So it's very easy to remember. It's 4 letters: A, assess; C, commit; T, transform; and D, disclose. So this is a circle. Companies should first assess their impact and dependencies on nature, set science-based targets, so to commit, and then transform their business model, and finally disclose, report along this circle. But I think, as you mentioned, walking through the whole process is actually a very long process, and it's a journey that every company is on. So how do we not get paralyzed by this big framework? Companies should start now, and they can learn by doing and learn along the way. These actions also need to be they are synergistic with net zero goals and climate actions, and they need to now be integrated into companies' transition plan, because our companies are looking at net zero transition plans. So how do we adapt those and integrate those with nature positive transition? As the first step, of course, I would repeat what Eva has mentioned, to follow the initial guidance from SBTN and also the LEAP approach from TNFD, especially on the scoping phase. So a simple step is to locate the interface with nature, for example, by overlaying where is the location of companies' assets and processes with biodiversity hotspots. And then you can also do a high-level screening to identify, maybe at a sector average level, where is the most material impact dependencies. And then after that, you can dive into company-specific data and where is your most material impact. But there's a lot that companies can start by doing now and build capacities, because it takes time to build capacity on collecting data, etc. So again, just repeating, everyone is saying you can start now, just be transparent on what you're doing and the commitments to avoid the risk of greenwashing, etc.
A fabulous call to action. Thank you so much. And if I may just be cheeky enough to follow up with one last question on that, what do you perceive as the biggest barriers for business to take action now? And maybe that's something the rest of the panel might also just have some reflections on.
Yeah, maybe I can start. I can see definitely what you're saying, the tension between action and the emergency to take actions, but also the quality of projects and the fear of being accused for greenwashing is a big one. A second one, I think, is capacity building within the companies, but also within service providers, within consulting firms. We are in need of a huge capacity, like where are these people coming from? And thirdly, I think we need to fix the economics of nature and the ecosystem service, because we haven't solved this problem now. We all know the data. There's a gap of funding of $700 billion, but only by saying there's a gap doesn't mean there's an investor case or there's a case for funding. So how do we transform? How do we fix the economics? One way is definitely on the harmful subsidy reform. So on the policy level, how do we make sure phasing out and reform the harmful subsidies? But also, as Tim mentioned, there are some innovative market mechanisms to finance for nature, such as biodiversity credit, ecosystem payment. So these are the things we can do to gradually fix the economics.
And Christina, do you have any reflections on that? What do you see as some of the biggest barriers, and what are some of the things we might do now to overcome them?
I think it is to dare to share, and you lead with facts. You have to know then, of course, where you are, where it is most material for you, where you have the biggest impact, and also share where you are doing good, but also where you're struggling and where you would need to have more people, more companies, other organizations, NGOs joining in to actually get to the right state. Yeah. And I think that in terms of what you mentioned, greenwashing, Jingjing here, that of course people can be very scared and people maybe don't dare to say anything. And I mean, the solution is not to be silent. Yeah, you need to secure, of course, that you always talk and behave with integrity, but that you actually start to do that. And I think we have a culture commitment within IKEA, which I think is such a good one also for this work with nature, climate, and people. Yeah, and it is that we need to work together. We need to lead by example. specifically us, the big companies, we have just heard what Eva said, we need to do good. And then we need to find better ways, and we need to act now. We need to get into action. So those things work together, be the good example, find better ways and get it done. So somehow I want to say simple as that, not saying that it's simple, but we can all understand and hear what we need to do. We have to get it into our hands and our feet and get going. So the time, I think, is actually one of the barriers. We don't have the time on our side. So we need to start do now, and we need to put up the good things we do now with even more speed. So a friend of mine, she always says, double the good and half the bad. So kind of do that.
Very good. Tim, any final thoughts?
Time is clearly a main barrier because we don't have enough of it. We have almost everything else. We have the solutions. We have now a framework. We have a lot of business interests. So we need leadership at all levels now, at the political level, because remember, this is a global framework that still needs to be implemented into national law. We need leadership from businesses to also be bold and, as Christina said, state what they're doing and also state what others could be doing. So we need to help each other out, share experience and knowledge. And then we need to solve the data management challenge with measuring and improving our nature footprint. But all of that is feasible. We just have to hurry up.
Brilliant. Very clear. Time is of the essence. And I'm also conscious that we're running out of time on this particular session. So, Eva, I'd love to just hand to you as my co-host here today to just perhaps give us your final reflections on everything that we've heard today.
Well, thanks. I've found this exchange really uplifting. If you just reflect for a moment on the maturity and the fluency with which we're talking about these issues, something has changed and we need to now obviously act. We spoke about accounting for nature, but we can't catch up overnight with the maturity of the financial accounting methodologies, but we will get there. And people will require financial grade information on environmental and social impacts as they do on financial impacts, but it will take a while to get there. We talked about accountability, and in this panel, there's a strong sense of accountability from consumers all the way to businesses and investors asking the right questions. And we have this issue of time, which is we need to have halted and reversed nature loss by 2030, yet we need to keep the momentum going right now with integrity and transparency. And in a way, I think, as Tim says, we have all of the elements and we just need to stay razor focused and not play the blame game, not let the perfect be the enemy of the good, and just make sure that we take off our institutional hats wherever possible. Because ultimately, as we said, we'll all win or we'll all lose in the future. And the ones that will lose are future generations. And we can't let that happen. Thank you, Camilla, and all.
Thank you all so much for taking the time to be with us here today. As you say, Eva, a hugely uplifting session, and something clearly has changed. And perhaps it's this recognition that 100% of the world's GDP is dependent on nature, and therefore that actually nature is well and truly, in the true sense, everyone's business. So hopefully COP15 in Montreal will be a real turning point in our relationship with nature, and will be the platform for us delivering collaboratively across sector a more equitable, net zero and nature positive future. So thank you again so much for joining the session, and thank you in particular to all of our speakers for their insightful contributions today. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.